The cool morning air caressed Oliver Merritt's face as he guided the luxury sedan through the winding roads of Newport, Rhode Island. At 32, he had spent the last 6 years as one of the most requested private chauffeurs for the ultra-wealthy who summered in the historic coastal town. Today's assignment seemed routine: pick up an elderly art collector from her waterfront mansion and drive her to a gallery opening in Providence. The estate belonged to the Blackwood family, known for their shipping empire and infamous for their closely guarded privacy. Oliver had driven members of the family before, but had never been invited beyond the circular driveway. Today was different. Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood's assistant had called the service that morning, explaining that the 87-year-old matriarch was moving slower than usual and would need assistance gathering her things before they could depart. "You'll need to come inside," the clipped voice had instructed over the phone. "Mrs. Blackwood will be waiting in the east sitting room. Someone will show you the way." And so he found himself walking up the imposing limestone steps of Windermere House, a 30-room mansion that had been featured in architectural magazines and historical documentaries, but rarely opened its doors to outsiders. The uniformed staff member who greeted him had a formal, almost military bearing that made Oliver acutely conscious of his own middle-class background. Despite the premium quality of his chauffeur's uniform, he felt underdressed the moment he stepped onto the gleaming marble floors of the grand entrance hall. "This way, sir," the staff member said, leading him past rooms glimpsed only through partially open doors. A formal dining room with a chandelier that could have illuminated a small theater, a library with ceiling-high bookshelves accessible only by rolling ladders. Oliver maintained his professional demeanor, but couldn't help absorbing every detail. This was old money, the kind that had shaped American industry and politics for generations. The corridor they walked down was a gallery unto itself, with paintings that Oliver, despite his limited knowledge of art, recognized as museum-worthy. Landscapes by American masters hung alongside what looked like European works from centuries past. Then he saw it among the prestigious collection, a modest oil painting in a simple wooden frame. It showed a rocky beach at sunset, waves crashing against a weathered lighthouse. A small figure stood on the shore, a boy of perhaps 8 or 9, his face turned toward the sea. Oliver stopped abruptly, his heart suddenly hammering in his chest. The boy in the painting was unmistakably him, the same unruly dark hair that had been a constant battle throughout his childhood, the same slightly too large ears he had been teased about in elementary school, even the way he stood with his weight shifted to one side, a habit his mother used to point out whenever she took photos. "Sir," the staff member had paused, noticing that Oliver was no longer following. "Is everything all right?" Oliver couldn't tear his eyes from the painting. "That picture," he managed to say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Who painted it?" The staff member glanced at the artwork with disinterest. "I'm afraid I don't know the details of every piece in the collection. Mrs. Blackwood is waiting. If you could please." But Oliver couldn't move. His mind was racing through possibilities, each more implausible than the last. He had never been to this beach, never posed for any painting. The artwork appeared to be decades old, its style reminiscent of early 20th century American Impressionism, yet there he was, a perfect likeness of himself as a child, standing on an unfamiliar shore. "I need to know about this painting," Oliver said with unexpected firmness. "Please, it's important." The staff member's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a flicker of annoyance. "Sir, Mrs. Blackwood is not someone who appreciates being kept waiting. I suggest we continue to the east sitting room immediately." With great effort, Oliver pulled himself away from the painting, but his mind remained fixed on the impossible image as they walked through the mansion's labyrinthine corridors. When they finally reached the sitting room, Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood was seated near a window that overlooked the Atlantic Ocean. She was a slight figure, wrapped in a cashmere shawl despite the summer warmth, her white hair arranged in an elegant chignon. When she turned to look at Oliver, her eyes, A startling clear blue widened almost imperceptibly. "You must be from the car service," she said, her voice stronger than her frail appearance suggested. "Yes, ma'am. Oliver Merritt, at your service." He moved forward to help her up, but she waved him away. "I'm perfectly capable of standing on my own, young man. I simply move at my own pace these days." As she gathered a small beaded handbag and what appeared to be an exhibition catalogue, Oliver struggled to maintain his professional composure. The questions about the painting burned on his tongue, but years of serving the wealthy had taught him discretion and timing. This was neither the moment nor the place. Yet as they were about to leave the room, Mrs. Blackwood paused and studied his face with unsettling intensity. "You noticed it, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "The Lambert painting in the West Corridor." Oliver felt a chill despite the room's warmth. "Yes, ma'am. It caught my attention. I imagined it might." She continued to examine him with those piercing blue eyes. "The resemblance is rather extraordinary, isn't it? Ma'am, if I may ask, who is the boy in that painting?" Eleanor Blackwood's expression remained unreadable. "That painting has hung in this house for over 70 years, Mr. Merritt. It was acquired by my late husband's father in 1948. She paused, then added, "The boy was my husband's younger brother, Thomas. He disappeared in the summer of 1945. He was 9 years old." Oliver felt as though the floor had tilted beneath him. 1945, decades before he was born. The impossible likeness was just that, impossible. Yet he had seen it with his own eyes. I'm sorry for your family's loss," he managed to say. Mrs. Blackwood nodded slightly. "It was a long time ago. The family searched for years, hired the best private investigators money could buy. Thomas was never found." She gestured toward the door. "We should leave now if we're to arrive at the gallery opening on time." During the drive to Providence, Oliver maintained his professional demeanor with effort. Mrs. Blackwood sat silently in the back seat, occasionally making notes in the exhibition catalogue, but otherwise offering no conversation. Oliver's mind raced with questions that seemed to have no rational answers. How could he bear such a striking resemblance to a boy who disappeared decades before his birth? Was it merely an extraordinary coincidence? Or was there some connection between his own history and the Blackwood family that he had never known? He was adopted. Perhaps there was a link there. But his adoption had been closed, the records sealed, and his adoptive parents had passed away years ago in a house fire that had also destroyed any documents they might have kept. When they arrived at the gallery, Oliver helped Mrs. Blackwood from the car. As she was about to walk away, she pressed something into his hand. A business card, heavy and expensive, with only a phone number embossed in elegant script. "Call this number tomorrow at precisely 3 p.m., she said quietly. "I believe we have matters to discuss that would be better addressed privately." Before he could respond, she was walking away, immediately surrounded by gallery staff who had been awaiting her arrival. Oliver returned to the car, examining the card in the privacy of the driver's seat. He slipped it into his pocket, his mind whirling with possibilities. The next 24 hours passed in a state of suspended anticipation. Oliver went through the motions of his usual routine. Another driving assignment in the morning, a quick lunch at his favorite deli, a call to his girlfriend Mia to cancel their dinner plans with a vague excuse about work. At exactly 3 p.m., he dialed the number on the card. It rang twice before a formal male voice answered. "Mr. Merritt, Mrs. Blackwood is expecting your call. Please hold." After a brief silence, Eleanor Blackwood came on the line. "I've been considering how to approach this matter, Mr. Merritt," she said without preamble. "I believe the most straightforward approach is best. Would you be available to come to Windermere tomorrow morning? Say, at 10 o'clock? There are things you should see, things I should explain in person." Oliver agreed immediately, though he had to rearrange his driving schedule to accommodate the meeting. That night, he couldn't sleep. He lay awake beside Mia, listening to her steady breathing and staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying the moment he had seen his childhood face in that decades-old painting. The next morning, he arrived at Windermere House precisely at 10. The same staff member from before met him at the door, but this time led him to a different part of the mansion, a small, wood-paneled study that felt more intimate than the grand spaces he had seen previously. Mrs. Blackwood was already there, seated behind an antique desk with several folders arranged neatly before her. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Merritt," she said, gesturing to a chair opposite her. "I've spent the night reviewing some family documents that I believe may be relevant to our unusual situation." She opened one of the folders and removed a faded black and white photograph, sliding it across the desk toward him. It showed a family group on the steps of what appeared to be a summer home, a man and woman in 1940s clothing, 2 teenage boys, and the same young boy from the painting. "This is the last family photograph taken before Thomas disappeared," Mrs. Blackwood explained. "It was the summer of 1945, just after the war ended. My husband, Frederick, is the oldest boy there. He was 16 at the time. His brother Robert was 14, and Thomas, as I mentioned, was 9. Oliver studied the photograph, the uncanny resemblance making his skin prickle. The young Thomas Blackwood could have been his twin, or rather, he could have been Thomas's. "What happened to him?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Blackwood's composed expression faltered slightly. "The official story is that he wandered away from the family's summer home and was presumably drowned. It was a tragic accident, according to the newspapers and police reports." She paused. "But my late husband never believed that version of events. Frederick spent much of his life quietly searching for answers about his brother's fate." She opened another folder, this one containing what appeared to be letters and legal documents. "What I'm about to share with you is known only to a handful of people, Mr. Merritt. The Blackwood family has protected these secrets for generations, not out of shame, but to protect those involved." She fixed him with those penetrating blue eyes. "I believe you may be Thomas Blackwood's grandson." Unraveling the past, Oliver stared at Mrs. Blackwood, certain he had misheard. "That's impossible," he finally said. "Thomas disappeared in 1945. He would have been in his 80s now if he had lived." Mrs. Blackwood nodded patiently. "Yes, and I believe he did live, Mr. Merritt. I believe Thomas escaped, or was taken from, the family that summer. And I believe he grew up under a different name, in a different life, eventually having children of his own, one of whom might have been your parent." She slid another photograph across the desk. This one showed a young man in his 20s, standing beside a classic car from the 1960s. Though older than the boy in the painting, the resemblance to both Thomas and Oliver himself was undeniable. "This photograph was sent anonymously to my husband in 1967. No name, no return address, just this image. Frederick was convinced it was Thomas. Then, in his early 30s, he hired investigators to track the lead. But whoever sent the photo had been careful. They found nothing. Oliver picked up the photograph, studying the face that could have been his father or uncle. But why would Thomas disappear? Why wouldn't he contact his family?" Mrs. Blackwood's face darkened. "That, Mr. Merritt, is where our family history becomes complicated. The Blackwoods were not always the respectable shipping magnates they appeared to be. During Prohibition, Thomas and Frederick's father, Jonathan Blackwood, built much of the family fortune through less than legal means. The shipping business was perfect cover for rum-running operations along the eastern seaboard." She paused, seeming to weigh how much to reveal. When Prohibition ended, Jonathan didn't abandon his criminal connections. Instead, he diversified. The family shipping business handled legitimate cargo, but it also facilitated other operations: art theft, smuggling, occasionally even human trafficking. The summer Thomas vanished, he had witnessed something he shouldn't have. We don't know exactly what. Frederick only learned pieces of the story years later, mostly through his mother's deathbed confession. But it appears Thomas saw his father commit a violent act against someone, possibly a murder. Jonathan discovered that his youngest son had seen too much. Mrs. Blackwood's voice had dropped almost to a whisper. Frederick believed that his father arranged for Thomas to disappear, not to kill him. Jonathan loved his children in his own way. but to remove him from the family permanently, to send him away with a trusted associate who would ensure Thomas grew up far from Newport, with a new identity and no memory of his origins. Oliver felt cold despite the warm day. "Are you suggesting my grandfather was kidnapped by his own father, and that somehow I'm the result of this family crime?" "I'm suggesting," Mrs. Blackwood replied carefully, "that there are too many coincidences to ignore. Your extraordinary resemblance to Thomas. The timing of your birth, you would be the right age to be his grandson. And the fact that you were adopted through a closed process with no information about your birth parents." She reached for another folder. "After I met you yesterday, I had my attorney make some inquiries. They're quite efficient when properly motivated. You were adopted in Cincinnati, Ohio, in 1991, correct?" Oliver nodded, stunned that she had discovered this information so quickly. "Your adoptive parents, James and Marilyn Merritt, adopted you when you were approximately 6 months old. The adoption was arranged through a now-defunct private agency called New Beginnings Adoptions. That agency," Mrs. Blackwood continued, "was established in 1965 and closed its doors in 1998 following investigations into irregularities in its practices. It specialized in what were euphemistically called discretionary adoptions, placements where birth parents wished for absolute anonymity, often in cases involving wealthy or prominent families." Oliver struggled to process this flood of information. "Are you saying I was some kind of illegal adoption? Not illegal necessarily, but perhaps not entirely above board either. The agency operated in a gray area legally, catering to people who could afford to bypass certain regulations and paperwork." She studied his face. "I believe your birth mother may have been Thomas Blackwood's daughter, which would make you his grandson, and by extension a member of this family." Oliver stood suddenly overwhelmed. This is too much. I need some air." Mrs. Blackwood nodded understandingly. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The veranda is through those French doors." Still clutching the photograph of the young man from the 1960s, Oliver stepped outside into the sunlight. The veranda overlooked immaculately landscaped gardens that stretched toward the distant shimmer of the Atlantic. He drew deep breaths, trying to steady himself. His entire sense of identity had been upended in the span of 24 hours. He had grown up believing himself to be Oliver Merritt, the adopted son of a middle-class couple from suburban Ohio. Now, he was being told he might be the great-grandson of a Prohibition-era criminal kingpin, the grandson of a boy who had vanished in mysterious circumstances, the heir to God knows what dark legacy. And yet, there was that painting, that face that was undeniably his own, captured decades before his birth. After several minutes, Oliver returned to the study. Mrs. Blackwood was still seated behind the desk, patient as ever. "Why are you telling me this now?" he asked. "Why, after all these years, would you reach out to a possible Blackwood descendant?" She smiled sadly. "I'm 87 years old, Mr. Merritt. I'm the last one left who knows the full story, or at least as much of it as anyone knows. Frederick died 15 years ago. Robert passed away in 1978. If I don't share what I know now, these secrets will go to the grave with me." She closed the folder in front of her. "And I made a promise to my husband. Frederick never stopped looking for his brother or his brother's descendants. On his deathbed, he made me swear I would continue the search as long as I was able. When I saw you yesterday, I knew immediately who you must be. You have the Blackwood look, not just Thomas, but Frederick too. The same eyes, the same jawline." Oliver sat down slowly. "What do you want from me?" "Nothing you're not willing to give," Mrs. Blackwood assured him. "I've hoped for years to find some trace of Thomas's line. Now that I have, I simply want to reconnect that broken branch to the family tree, to offer you the chance to know your heritage, for better or worse." She hesitated. "And, selfishly perhaps, to fulfill my promise to Frederick before my own time comes." "I don't know what to think," Oliver admitted. "This all seems so incredible. Do you have any proof that I'm actually related to Thomas Blackwood, beyond a physical resemblance that could, however unlikely, be coincidence? Mrs. Blackwood reached into a drawer and withdrew a small wooden box. Not proof precisely, but perhaps evidence substantial enough to warrant further investigation. She opened the box and removed what appeared to be an old pocket watch. This belonged to Thomas. It was a gift from his mother on his 9th birthday, just months before he disappeared. It's engraved. She handed the watch to Oliver, who turned it over to read the inscription on the back. To Thomas, may your time be filled with joy. Love, Mother. June 12th, 1945. The watch was heavy in his hand, gold with an elegant chain. It's beautiful, he said quietly, but I don't see how this connects to me. Open it, Mrs. Blackwood instructed. Oliver pressed the latch, and the watch face sprung open. Inside, opposite the watch face, was a tiny photograph protected by glass, a formal portrait of the Blackwood family, including young Thomas. But what caught Oliver's eye was a small mark on the inside of the case, a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon. His fingers instinctively went to his own wrist, where an identical mark had been present since his birth. He had always assumed it was just a quirky birthmark, nothing more. How did you know? He whispered. Mrs. Blackwood's eyes glimmered. Frederick told me once that all male Blackwoods carried that mark, usually on the wrist or forearm. It's been a family trait for generations. When I saw you help me into the car yesterday, I noticed yours immediately. Oliver closed the watch, feeling its weight in more ways than one. What happens now? He asked. That depends entirely on you, Mrs. Blackwood replied. I can show you more. Family records, photographs, letters. Frederick kept meticulous files on his search for Thomas, but only if you wish to see them. She leaned forward slightly. Or you can walk away from Windermere today and never return. I would understand if that were your choice. The Blackwood legacy is complicated at best, dangerous at worst. Dangerous, Oliver echoed. What do you mean? Mrs. Blackwood's expression grew serious. The Blackwood family has powerful connections, Mr. Merritt. Not all of them savory. Jonathan Blackwood's criminal enterprises didn't disappear with his death in 1962. They evolved, changed hands, developed new facades. Some of those operations continue to this day, run by people who would prefer that old secrets remain buried. She paused. There's a reason Thomas was sent away rather than simply silenced. There's a reason my husband's search for his brother was conducted with such discretion. And there's a reason I've waited until now in my final years to reach out to you. The risk to myself is minimal at this point in my life. The risk to you, however, she left the implication hanging. Oliver felt a chill despite the warm room. Are you saying I could be in danger just by learning about my own family history? I'm saying that knowledge is rarely without consequence, Mrs. Blackwood replied carefully, particularly when that knowledge involves powerful people with much to lose. She studied him thoughtfully. But I believe you have a right to know who you are and where you come from. I also believe that together we might finally uncover the full truth of what happened to Thomas, a truth that has eluded the Blackwood family for over 7 decades. Oliver glanced down at the pocket watch in his hand, then at the photographs on the desk. The missing boy from 1945, the mysterious young man from the 1960s, and his own reflection in a small mirror on the wall. 3 generations of the same face, separated by time but connected by blood and secrets. I need time to think, he said finally. This is overwhelming. Of course, Mrs. Blackwood nodded. Take all the time you need. But I would ask one thing: discretion. Tell no one what we've discussed today, not even those closest to you, at least until you've decided how to proceed. She wrote something on a small card and handed it to him. This is my private number. When you're ready to talk again, if you're ready, call me directly. As Oliver prepared to leave, Mrs. Blackwood added, the watch was Thomas's. I think he would want you to have it. Oliver hesitated, then slipped the pocket watch into his jacket. Thank you. That evening, Oliver sat alone in his apartment, the gold watch open before him, studying the tiny family portrait and the distinctive crescent birthmark that mirrored his own. Mia had texted twice, asking about dinner plans, but he hadn't responded. How could he face her with the storm of questions and revelations whirling inside him? If what Mrs. Blackwood suggested was true, everything he thought he knew about himself was only part of the story. He was not simply Oliver Merritt, adopted son of James and Marilyn Merritt. He was potentially the heir to a complicated and possibly dangerous legacy that stretched back generations. His phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Mr. Merritt. The voice was male, unfamiliar. Yes? My name is Victor Crane. I represent certain interests connected to the Blackwood family. I understand you had a meeting with Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood today. Oliver's blood ran cold. Who is this? How did you get this number? That's not important right now, the voice continued smoothly. What matters is that you understand the delicacy of the situation you've stumbled into. Mrs. Blackwood is an elderly woman with, shall we say, an overactive imagination fueled by family legends and conspiracy theories. Her late husband's obsession with his missing brother became her own in her declining years. The man paused. I'm calling as a courtesy, Mr. Merritt, a friendly word of advice. Forget whatever story Mrs. Blackwood told you today. Return any item she may have given you and walk away. Are you threatening me? Oliver demanded, his heart pounding. A soft chuckle came through the phone. Not at all. I'm simply suggesting that pursuing this matter further would be unnecessarily complicated for everyone involved, including yourself and your girlfriend, Mia Chen. Her new position at Boston General Hospital is quite prestigious, isn't it? It would be a shame if something disrupted her promising career. The call ended before Oliver could respond, leaving him staring at his phone in shock. They knew about Mia. They had found his private number within hours of his meeting with Mrs. Blackwood. What else did they know? What else could they do? His immediate instinct was to call the police. But what would he say? That an old woman had shown him some photographs and suggested he might be related to her family. That a mysterious caller had made vague insinuations. There was nothing concrete, nothing that would warrant police involvement. Yet the threat had been unmistakable. His mind raced through options. He could walk away, as the caller had suggested, return the watch, forget the whole bizarre episode, go back to his life as Oliver Merritt, chauffeur. The safe option, the sensible option. But even as he considered it, he knew he couldn't. The questions Mrs. Blackwood had raised about his identity, his heritage, his very self would never leave him. And now there was this threat, confirming in its way that there was something real behind those questions, something worth protecting through intimidation. Have you ever wondered what secrets your family might be hiding? What would you do if someone threatened you to stop looking into your own past? Drop the word heritage in the comments if you think Oliver should keep digging despite the dangers, or safety if you think he should protect himself and Mia by walking away. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Oliver sat in stunned silence, trying to process the implications. If Mrs. Blackwood's theory was correct, his birth parents had died when he was just months old. His birth father might have been Thomas Blackwood's son, making him Thomas's grandson rather than his great-grandson, as she'd initially suggested. The story was becoming more complex, the connections more tenuous, yet the fragments seemed to fit together in a way that explained his inexplicable resemblance to the boy in the painting. "Do you have any evidence of this connection?" he finally asked. "The accident report? Adoption records?" Mr. Harrington opened his briefcase and withdrew a thin file. "We've obtained the police report from the 1990 accident," he said, sliding it across the table. "The victims were identified as James and Elena Sullivan. Their child, a 6-month-old boy, was listed simply as Baby Sullivan in the official documentation. The infant was taken to Cincinnati Children's Hospital and later placed in temporary foster care pending adoption proceedings." Oliver opened the file with trembling hands. The accident report was clinical, detailing a head-on collision on a rain-slicked highway. The responding officer had noted that the male victim carried ID, identifying him as James Sullivan, age 32, with an Illinois driver's license. The female victim, presumed to be his wife, had no identification on her person. Their vehicle was registered in Illinois under the name James Sullivan. A photograph was paperclipped to the report. A standard police photograph of the wrecked car, a late-model sedan crushed beyond recognition. "This doesn't prove I'm their child," Oliver said quietly. "No," Mrs. Blackwood acknowledged. "That connection remains circumstantial. The adoption records that would definitively link baby Sullivan to Oliver Merritt are sealed, and New Beginnings Adoption Agency destroyed many of their files when they closed in 1998 amid allegations of improper practices. But we have been making progress," Mr. Harrington added. "We've identified the social worker who handled the Sullivan baby's case. She's retired now, living in Florida. And we've located the attorney who processed the adoption for New Beginnings. With the right incentives, they might be willing to confirm the connection." Oliver closed the file, his mind spinning with questions. "Even if you can prove I'm the Sullivan baby, how does that connect me to Thomas Blackwood? This James Sullivan could have been anyone." Mrs. Blackwood pulled out one more document from her portfolio, a grainy photocopy of what appeared to be a birth certificate. "This is the birth certificate of James Sullivan, born in Buenos Aires in 1958 to Michael Sullivan, formerly Michael Donovan, and his wife Maria. Frederick obtained this during his investigations in Argentina. The timing would be right for James to be Thomas's son, raised as Donovan's own." She paused. "And there's one more thing." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small envelope. This was among Frederick's personal effects after he died. "I didn't understand its significance until recently." Inside the envelope was a faded color photograph from what appeared to be the 1970s. It showed a teenage boy standing beside a much older man on a fishing dock. The boy's resemblance to both Thomas from the earlier photos and to Oliver himself was unmistakable, but it was the older man who caught Oliver's attention. Something about the eyes, the set of the jaw, reminded him of the portrait of Thomas as a child. "Is that? We believe the older man is Thomas Blackwood in his 40s, Mrs. Blackwood confirmed, "and the boy is likely James Sullivan, his son, who would later become your father." Frederick received this photograph anonymously in 1976, with only a Buenos Aires postmark. He believed it was sent by Thomas himself, a cryptic acknowledgement of his true identity. Oliver stared at the photograph, at the face of the man who might be his grandfather, and the teenager who might be his father. Both long dead, their secrets buried with them. Both connected to him by blood and by the strange, twisted path that had led to his adoption in Ohio and eventually to this moment in a quiet library room in Boston. "What do you want from me?" he asked again, looking up at Mrs. Blackwood. "Why go to all this trouble to find me and tell me this story?" The elderly woman's eyes softened. "First, because I made a promise to Frederick. He never stopped searching for his brother or his brother's descendants. He wanted to make amends, to restore what had been taken from Thomas." Amends for what? Frederick wasn't responsible for his brother's disappearance. No, but he felt guilty nonetheless. He was the oldest son. He believed he should have protected Thomas somehow. And when he inherited control of Blackwood Shipping upon his father's death, he discovered the full extent of Jonathan's criminal enterprises. He spent decades trying to legitimize the family businesses, to atone for the sins of the past. She paused. "But there's another reason. Jeffrey Blackwood, my husband's nephew, has taken the company in directions Frederick would have abhorred. He's revived some of the darker aspects of the business that Frederick worked so hard to eliminate. I've watched helplessly as Jeffrey has corrupted Frederick's legacy bit by bit." Her voice hardened. "I want justice. For Thomas, for Frederick, and for you. I want Jeffrey to face consequences for his actions, and I believe your existence, as the legitimate grandson of Thomas Blackwood, could threaten Jeffrey's control of the Blackwood empire." "You want to use me to take down Jeffrey," Oliver said. Neither accusation nor agreement in his tone, simply understanding. "I want to right a historical wrong," Mrs. Blackwood corrected. "And yes, I want to see Jeffrey removed from power before he completely dismantles everything good that Frederick built. But I also genuinely believe you deserve to know your heritage and to claim what is rightfully yours." Mr. Harrington leaned forward. "If we can establish your identity as Thomas Blackwood's grandson, you would have a legitimate claim to a significant portion of the Blackwood fortune, potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. Jeffrey knows this, which is why he sent Victor Crane to warn you off. That's why the threat seems so immediate," Oliver realized. "They already knew who I was before I did." "They suspected," Mrs. Blackwood clarified. "Jeffrey has always been paranoid about potential claimants to the Blackwood fortune. He maintains extensive surveillance on anyone connected to the family, including me. When you came to Windermere and showed such interest in Thomas's portrait, Jeffrey's people would have run an immediate background check. Your adoption and your physical resemblance to Thomas would have raised red flags." She sighed. "I should have been more careful in how I approached you. I've put you in danger." "What kind of danger exactly?" Oliver asked. "How far would Jeffrey go to protect his position?" Mrs. Blackwood and Mr. Harrington exchanged glances. "Jeffrey isn't his grandfather," she repeated her earlier assessment. "He prefers financial and legal weapons to physical ones. He might threaten your girlfriend's career, create problems with your employer, perhaps fabricate legal troubles. But actual violence? That's not typically his style." "Typically," Oliver echoed. "But not never. The stakes are very high," Mr. Harrington acknowledged. "We shouldn't underestimate what Jeffrey might do if sufficiently threatened." Oliver sat back in his chair, overwhelmed by the implications. In the space of 2 days, he had gone from being a chauffeur with a modest, ordinary life to being the potential heir to a shipping fortune built on both legitimate business and decades of criminal enterprise. He had discovered that his birth parents had died when he was an infant, that his grandfather might have been a boy, kidnapped by his own father, and that he now faced an adversary with virtually unlimited resources who saw him as a threat. "What's our next move?" he asked finally. "If I decide to pursue this, to find out for certain who I am and what connection I have to the Blackwoods, what do we do?" "We need definitive proof of your lineage," Mr. Harrington said. "DNA testing would be ideal, but we would need samples from a confirmed Blackwood relative for comparison." "Jeffrey would never consent to such a test," Mrs. Blackwood pointed out, "but there are other options. Frederick's remains were cremated, but there might be personal effects with recoverable DNA, hairbrushes perhaps, or other items preserved among his belongings. Even with DNA evidence, establishing your claim would involve complex litigation," the attorney continued. "The Blackwood family trust is protected by layers of legal barriers specifically designed to prevent outside claims. We would need to build an airtight case before making any public move." Mrs. Blackwood leaned forward, her blue eyes intense. "But before we proceed with any legal strategy, you need to understand what you're getting into, Mr. Merritt. Once we move forward, there's no going back. Jeffrey will use every resource at his disposal to discredit you, to maintain his control of the Blackwood assets. Your life as you've known it will change irrevocably." Oliver thought of his modest apartment, his job as a chauffeur, his relationship with Mia, a quiet, uncomplicated life. Was he willing to risk it all for a heritage he had never known, for a fortune he had never sought, for a fight against a powerful enemy he had never met? And yet, the boy in the painting, the crescent birthmark on his wrist, the undeniable resemblance to Thomas Blackwood. Those weren't coincidences. They were fragments of his true identity, pieces of a puzzle he had never known he was missing. "I need to talk to Mia," he said finally. "If I'm going to pursue this, she deserves to know what's happening. She could be caught in the crossfire." He looked at Mrs. Blackwood. "Unless you think that would put her in more danger." "Telling her might put her in a difficult position," Mrs. Blackwood acknowledged. But not telling her might be worse. If Jeffrey's people are already aware of her, they might approach her directly, try to use her to pressure you. She sighed. There are no risk-free choices here, Mr. Merritt. Oliver, he said quietly. If we're potentially family, you might as well use my first name. A small smile touched Mrs. Blackwood's lips. Oliver, then. And you should call me Eleanor. She gathered her documents, returning them to the portfolio. Take tonight to think, to talk with Mia if you choose. We'll meet again tomorrow to discuss how to proceed. As they prepared to leave, she added, Be careful, Oliver. Watch for anyone following you. Don't use your regular phone for sensitive conversations. And remember that Jeffrey has resources we can only guess at. Oliver nodded, the weight of the situation settling on his shoulders. Tomorrow, then, he agreed, pocketing the photograph of the man who might be his grandfather and the teenager who might be his father. That evening, Oliver sat with Mia in their favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where they had had their first date 3 years earlier. He had swept his apartment for listening devices before leaving, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid beyond belief just days ago, but now felt necessary. He had left his phone at home and asked Mia to do the same. She had complied, confused but trusting. Now, as they sat in a corner booth far from other diners, he struggled to find words to explain the inexplicable. You're scaring me, Ollie, Mia said finally, reaching across the table to take his hand. What's going on? Are you in some kind of trouble? Not exactly trouble, he replied carefully. But my life has become complicated in ways I never could have imagined. Slowly, haltingly, he began to explain. The painting at Windermere House, the impossible resemblance, Mrs. Blackwood's revelations about Thomas, the threatening phone call, the meeting at the library. Mia listened without interrupting, her expression shifting from confusion to disbelief to concern. So this woman thinks you're the grandson of a kidnapped heir to some shipping fortune, she summarized when he finally fell silent. And the current head of the family is worried enough about it to threaten you and me. It sounds like something out of a movie, Ollie. I know how it sounds, he acknowledged. I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen the evidence with my own eyes. But the resemblance, Mia, it's uncanny. And the birthmark, the timing of my adoption, the connections to Argentina, it all fits together too perfectly to be coincidence. Even if it's true, Mia said carefully, is this something you want to pursue? You've never cared about wealth or status. Is a potential inheritance worth the risk? Worth disrupting our lives? Oliver turned the pocket watch over in his hand, Thomas Blackwood's watch, now his. It's not about the money, he said slowly. It's about knowing who I am, where I come from. My entire life I've had this emptiness where my origins should be. I've always told myself it didn't matter, that I was Oliver Merritt regardless of my birth parents. But now, he looked up at her, now I have a chance to fill that emptiness, to connect with a heritage I never knew existed. Mia squeezed his hand. I understand that. I do. But this Jeffrey person sounds dangerous. If he's willing to threaten your livelihood, my career, what else might he do? Mrs. Blackwood, Eleanor, doesn't think he would resort to physical violence. She says that's not his style. But she can't be certain, Mia pointed out. And you're talking about challenging his control of billions of dollars. People have done terrible things for far less. She hesitated. There's something else bothering me about all this. If what Mrs. Blackwood says is true, your great-grandfather was some kind of criminal kingpin. Your grandfather was kidnapped as part of a family conspiracy. This legacy you're so eager to claim, it's built on a foundation of crime and deception. Oliver hadn't considered that aspect, the moral implications of claiming a heritage tainted by criminal activity. I hadn't thought about it that way, he admitted. You're right. If Jonathan Blackwood was involved in rum running, smuggling, maybe even murder, is that a legacy I want to embrace? Mia's expression softened. I'm not saying you shouldn't pursue the truth about your past. I just think you need to be clear-eyed about what that truth might entail. She paused. And I'm worried about you, Ollie. This whole situation seems volatile and dangerous. I know, he said quietly, but I can't just walk away now. Not when I'm so close to answers I've wanted my whole life. He met her gaze steadily. I understand if you want to step back from this. If it's too risky or too bizarre. Don't be ridiculous. Mia cut him off. I'm not going anywhere. Whatever this is, we'll face it together. She squeezed his hand. Just promise me you'll be careful, and if things get too dangerous, you'll walk away. I promise, he said, grateful beyond words for her support. The next day, Oliver met Eleanor and Mr. Harrington at a different location, a private room in a members-only club in Back Bay. The wood-paneled space with its leather armchairs and discreet service offered both comfort and privacy. I've decided to proceed, Oliver announced without preamble. I need to know the truth about my connection to the Blackwoods, regardless of the risks or complications. Eleanor nodded, a hint of relief in her eyes. I thought you might say that. The Blackwood determination shows in you, even if you didn't know it was there. Mr. Harrington opened his briefcase. Then we should discuss next steps. As I mentioned yesterday, our primary goal is to establish your lineage definitively. I've made arrangements to speak with the retired social worker from Cincinnati next week. In the meantime, we've been pursuing another angle. He produced a folder containing several documents. These are medical records from Frederick Blackwood's last hospitalization before his death. They include blood type information, genetic screening for hereditary conditions, and other potentially useful data. Not as definitive as a direct DNA comparison would be, but they could provide supporting evidence. And I've been going through Frederick's personal effects, Eleanor added. He kept a hairbrush that belonged to his mother, Thomas's mother as well. The brush is from the 1940s, preserved in a box with other mementos. If there are hair strands still caught in it, they might yield mitochondrial DNA, which passes through the maternal line. Would that be enough to prove my connection? Oliver asked. Not by itself, Mr. Harrington cautioned, but combined with the circumstantial evidence, your physical resemblance, the timing of your adoption, the documentation we've assembled regarding Thomas's disappearance and subsequent life, it could build a compelling case. A case that would need to be litigated aggressively, Eleanor added. Jeffrey's legal team would fight every step of the way. They would question the chain of custody for any DNA evidence, challenge the authenticity of documents, attempt to discredit witnesses. And outside the courtroom, Oliver asked, what should I expect from Jeffrey personally? Eleanor's expression grew grave. He's likely already investigating you thoroughly. Your background, your finances, your personal relationships. He'll look for vulnerabilities, pressure points. She hesitated. Has anything unusual happened since our meeting yesterday? Any strange calls, unexpected visitors? Oliver shook his head. Nothing obvious. But I've been watching for surveillance, keeping my phone off when discussing sensitive matters. Good, Mr. Harrington nodded approvingly. Maintain those precautions. Additionally, I would recommend you allow us to arrange security for you. Discreet but effective protection. Is that really necessary? Oliver asked, uncomfortable with the idea of bodyguards shadowing his movements. I believe it is, Eleanor said firmly. Not because I think Jeffrey would resort to physical violence, but because information is power in this situation. If his people are watching you, we should know about it. Professional security would help ensure your privacy and safety while we build our case. Oliver reluctantly agreed, though the thought of being followed by security personnel, even friendly ones, made the situation feel even more surreal. As the meeting continued, they discussed financial arrangements. Eleanor insisted on covering all costs related to the investigation and potential litigation, communication protocols, no electronic messages regarding sensitive matters, code words for telephone calls, and a timeline for their next steps. As they were preparing to leave, Oliver remembered a question that had been nagging at him. The painting, he said, the one of Thomas on the beach. You said it was acquired by Jonathan Blackwood in 1948, 3 years after Thomas disappeared. Where did it come from? Who painted it? Eleanor paused, her hand resting on the portfolio she had been about to close. That's an excellent question, and one that Frederick spent considerable time investigating. The painting is signed simply Lambert, with no first name. Art historians Frederick consulted identified it as the work of Caroline Lambert, a minor American impressionist who spent time in Argentina in the late 1940s. Argentina again, Oliver noted. Yes, Frederick believed the painting was Jonathan's way of keeping track of his youngest son from a distance, a commission arranged through intermediaries, perhaps, to capture an image of the boy in his new life. She shook her head. Jonathan Blackwood was a complex man, capable of arranging his own son's kidnapping to protect family secrets, yet sentimental enough to want a portrait to remember him by, or to assure himself that the boy was safe, Oliver suggested. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged, though I doubt Jonathan Blackwood's motivations were ever so straightforward or benevolent. As they parted ways, Eleanor pressed a small key into Oliver's palm. This opens a safe deposit box at First National Bank on Boylston Street. Inside is a journal that Frederick kept during his search for Thomas. It contains information too sensitive to discuss openly. Names, dates, details of Jonathan's criminal connections. Read it somewhere secure, memorize what you need, then return it to the bank. She met his gaze steadily. The journal also describes certain aspects of the Blackwood businesses that Jeffrey has continued, illegal operations that Frederick was working to dismantle before his death, information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands or powerful in the right ones. The implications were clear. The journal contained potentially incriminating information about Jeffrey's current activities. Information that could serve as leverage or make Oliver an even bigger target if Jeffrey discovered he possessed it. That evening, as Oliver carefully read Frederick's journal in the privacy of his apartment, his phone rang. The screen showed Mia's name, but when he answered, a male voice spoke, smooth, cultured, with an undertone of amused condescension. Mr. Merritt, I believe we spoke briefly the other night. Victor Crane. Oliver's heart began to pound, but he kept his voice steady. Where's Mia? If you've hurt her. Your girlfriend is perfectly fine, Crane interrupted. Having dinner with colleagues at Maison Robert as we speak. Celebration for a successful surgery, I believe. She'll never know we borrowed her phone for this call. Oliver's free hand clenched into a fist. What do you want? A meeting. Just a conversation between reasonable people. My employer would like to present an alternative to the path Mrs. Blackwood is encouraging you to take. Your employer threatened me and the woman I love, Oliver said coldly. Not the best way to arrange a friendly conversation. Crane chuckled. Perhaps not. Consider it an overzealous first approach. We're prepared to be much more accommodating now. He paused. Tomorrow, noon, the Prudential Center observation deck. Come alone. No security, no attorneys, no Mrs. Blackwood. Just you and a genuinely generous offer. The call ended before Oliver could respond. He immediately tried calling Mia's phone back, but it went straight to voicemail. Fighting panic, he called the restaurant Crane had mentioned and asked to speak with Dr. Chen. To his immense relief, Mia came to the phone moments later, confused by his urgent tone, but unharmed. Is everything okay? She asked. You sound strange. Everything's fine, he assured her, not wanting to worry her while she was out celebrating with colleagues. Just wanted to hear your voice. We'll talk when you get home. After hanging up, Oliver debated his next move. Common sense said to avoid the meeting entirely, to call Eleanor, to inform her security team, to stay as far away from Victor Crane and Jeffrey Blackwood as possible. But curiosity pulled at him. What offer could they possibly make that would counter his quest for identity, for truth? And more pragmatically, meeting Jeffrey's representative might provide insights into what they knew, what they feared, what leverage they thought would work against him. In the end, curiosity won. The next day, Oliver arrived at the Prudential Center observation deck precisely at noon. The tourist attraction offered panoramic views of Boston and, crucially, was public enough to discourage anything too threatening, while private enough in its scattered seating areas for a discreet conversation. He spotted Crane immediately, a tall, silver-haired man in his 50s, impeccably dressed in a grey suit that probably cost more than Oliver earned in a month. Beside him stood a younger man with a family resemblance so strong it could only be Geoffrey Blackwood himself. "Mr. Merritt," Crane nodded in greeting. "Thank you for coming. May I present Geoffrey Blackwood?" Geoffrey extended his hand, and Oliver found himself shaking it automatically. The man's grip was firm, his smile practiced, but cold. "My grandmother speaks highly of you," Geoffrey said, and Oliver noted the subtle emphasis on grandmother, a reminder of family connections, of legitimacy. "Eleanor has always had a soft spot for strays." Oliver let the insult pass without comment. "She mentioned you've taken the company in some interesting directions since your uncle's death." Geoffrey's smile remained fixed, but something flickered in his eyes. Wariness, perhaps. "Business evolves. What worked for my uncle's generation doesn't necessarily work for mine." He gestured to a seating area away from other visitors. "Shall we?" They settled into chairs arranged around a small table. The spectacular view of Boston spread out below them. A waiter appeared almost immediately with a silver tray bearing an ice bucket with champagne and 3 flutes. Geoffrey waved him away after he had poured their drinks. "I'll come straight to the point, Mr. Merritt," Geoffrey said, lifting his glass in a mock toast. "You believe you're Thomas Blackwood's grandson. You think this gives you some claim on the family fortune. You're allowing my grandmother to use you as a weapon against me, because she disapproves of how I run the company that my uncle left in my care." He sipped his champagne. All understandable, from a certain perspective, but ultimately misguided. Oliver left his glass untouched. "Is this where you make your generous offer?" "Indeed." Geoffrey set down his glass. $5 million. Tax-free, offshore if you prefer. A new identity if you want one. A fresh start. Far from Boston, with no financial worries for the rest of your life. He smiled thinly. All in exchange for walking away from Eleanor's little vendetta and signing a legally binding agreement never to pursue any claim against the Blackwood family or its assets. That's your offer? Money to disappear? $5 million is hardly disappearing, Mr. Merritt. It's more than you'd earn in several lifetimes as a chauffeur. Geoffrey leaned forward slightly. And considerably more than you'd likely see after years of expensive litigation, even if you somehow managed to establish a legitimate claim, which frankly, you won't. Because you'd make sure of it? Because the evidence simply isn't there. Geoffrey's tone was reasonable, almost compassionate. My grandmother has built a fantasy around you because she needs someone to carry on my uncle's misguided crusade. She's an elderly woman gripped by regrets and old family myths. The legend of Thomas's kidnapping has been part of family lore for decades, but there's never been any actual proof. He shook his head. Jonathan Blackwood was many things, but he didn't arrange the disappearance of his own son. Thomas drowned in a tragic accident. The body was never recovered, which has fed generations of conspiracy theories, but that's all they are, theories. And the resemblance? Oliver challenged. The painting? The birthmark? All coincidences? Remarkable coincidences, to be sure, enough to capture my grandmother's imagination and give her hope that her husband's obsession wasn't entirely unfounded. Geoffrey spread his hands. But coincidences nonetheless. The human mind is designed to find patterns, connections. Sometimes they exist only in our perception. Victor Crane, who had remained silent during the exchange, finally spoke. We've had DNA analysis done on hair samples from the brush Mrs. Blackwood believes belonged to Thomas's mother. The results were inconclusive at best. The samples were contaminated, degraded by time. He smiled sympathetically. You're chasing ghosts, Mr. Merritt. Phantoms created by an old woman's desperation and guilt. And yet, you're offering me $5 million to walk away from these phantoms, Oliver pointed out. That suggests you're not quite as confident in your position as you claim. Geoffrey's expression hardened slightly. Consider it an investment in efficiency. Fighting Eleanor's claims, frivolous though they are, would cost time, money, and unwanted publicity. $5 million now saves potentially more in the long run. He paused. It's also my final offer. Refuse it, and I will deploy every resource at my disposal to ensure you never see a penny of Blackwood money. Your life, your career, your relationship with Dr. Chen, all will become considerably more difficult. You're threatening me again, Oliver said quietly. I'm describing reality, Jeffrey corrected. I've built my life protecting what my uncle entrusted to me. I won't allow a chauffeur with a passing resemblance to a long-dead relative to threaten that legacy. He stood. You have 24 hours to consider the offer. Crane will contact you tomorrow for your answer. As they walked away, Oliver remained seated, staring out at the Boston skyline. The meeting had revealed two critical things. First, that Jeffrey was worried enough to offer a substantial sum, and second, that he already knew about Eleanor's DNA evidence and had potentially compromised it. The game was more dangerous and the stakes higher than Oliver had realized. He needed to talk to Eleanor and Mr. Harrington immediately, but as he stood to leave, a new realization struck him. If Jeffrey knew about the hairbrush and the DNA testing, what else did he know? Had he found out about Frederick's journal? About the safe deposit box? Was Oliver being followed even now? The observation deck suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable. He scanned the tourists around him with new suspicion. Any of them could be working for Jeffrey. Paranoia, perhaps, but after the events of the past few days, paranoia seemed increasingly justified. Oliver took a circuitous route back to his apartment, checking frequently for tails, changing transportation methods 3 times. By the time he arrived home, his nerves were frayed, but his determination had solidified. Jeffrey's offer, and more importantly his threats, had convinced Oliver that there was substance to Eleanor's claims. People didn't offer $5 million to make baseless accusations disappear. Back in his apartment, he called Eleanor using the prepaid phone. Jeffrey approached me directly, he told her without preamble. He offered $5 million to walk away, then threatened Mia and me when I didn't immediately accept. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. You met with Jeffrey? Oliver, that was incredibly dangerous. It was informative, he countered. He's worried, Eleanor, and he knows about the hairbrush, about the DNA testing you were planning. He claims they've already tested it, and the results were inconclusive. A long silence followed. That's impossible, Eleanor finally said. The hairbrush has been in my personal safe since Frederick's death. No one has access except me. Are you certain of that? No staff with combinations, no duplicate keys. She hesitated. My assistant Margaret has the combination for emergencies, but she's been with me for 30 years. I trust her completely. Could someone have pressured her, threatened her family perhaps? Another silence. I'll speak with her immediately, and I'll move the hairbrush to a more secure location. Her voice hardened. This changes things, Oliver. If Jeffrey is willing to offer that much money, it suggests he's genuinely concerned about your claim. And if he's compromised my household security, then we need to be even more careful, Oliver finished for her. He mentioned something else, that the DNA evidence was contaminated or degraded. Is that possible? With a sample that old, yes, Eleanor admitted. It's one of the challenges we face in proving your connection scientifically. But there are other approaches we can pursue. She paused. Have you read Frederick's journal yet? Most of it, Oliver confirmed. It's disturbing. The extent of Jonathan's criminal activities, the connections to organized crime, the suggestions about Jeffrey's current operations. It's worse than I imagined. Frederick spent decades trying to cleanse the family business, Eleanor said softly. When Jeffrey took control after Frederick's death, he systematically dismantled those reforms, restored the old connections, reopened channels that Frederick had closed permanently. Her voice took on a bitter edge. That's why this isn't just about your rightful inheritance, Oliver. It's about stopping Jeffrey before he completely corrupts everything Frederick worked for. The journal mentions specific operations, Oliver said carefully. Blackwood shipping containers used for human trafficking, money laundering through the company's international holdings, bribes to officials in multiple countries. All overseen by Jeffrey, Eleanor confirmed. Frederick documented everything, preparing to take action against his nephew, but he died before he could move forward. This information could destroy Jeffrey, Oliver realized. If it were made public or turned over to federal authorities, yes, which is why the journal is so dangerous and so valuable. Her tone grew urgent. You need to return it to the safe deposit box immediately, Oliver. If Jeffrey has compromised my security, he may know about the journal as well. You're not safe with it in your possession. Oliver glanced at the leather-bound volume on his coffee table. I'll take it back first thing tomorrow. No, Eleanor insisted. Now, tonight. I fear we may have less time than we thought. Her concern was infectious, and Oliver agreed to return the journal immediately. After hanging up, he secured the volume in an inner pocket of his jacket and prepared to leave. But as he reached for his door, a thought stopped him. If Jeffrey's people were watching his apartment, they would see him leave with the journal. They might even know what it contained. Taking the journal directly to the bank could lead them straight to the safe deposit box. Instead, he called Mia. I need your help, he said when she answered. No questions for now. Just trust me. Oliver waited 15 minutes. Time for Mia to leave his apartment and make her way to the bank. Then he stood, making a show of checking his watch and frowning as if late for an appointment. He exited the coffee shop and headed in the opposite direction from the bank, walking with purpose toward the waterfront. As he expected, the two men fell into step behind him, maintaining a discreet distance, but clearly tracking his movements. He led them on a winding path through the city, occasionally doubling back or taking sudden turns, as if trying to lose them. In reality, he was buying time for Mia, ensuring his followers remained focused entirely on him. After nearly an hour of this elaborate dance, his phone vibrated with a text message. Done. Safe at home. Be careful. Relief flooded through him. Mia had succeeded in depositing the journal. Now he needed to shake his tail and make his way to safety. He ducked into a crowded restaurant, weaving through the bar area and exiting through the kitchen, ignoring the protests of the staff. In the alley behind the building, he broke into a run, racing several blocks before flagging down a taxi. He gave the driver an address several blocks from Eleanor's hotel, constantly checking the rearview mirror for signs of pursuit. When he was certain he wasn't being followed, he contacted Eleanor using the prepaid phone. It's done, he said simply. The journal is secure. Thank goodness, she replied, her voice tense. Oliver, there's been a development. Margaret has confessed that Jeffrey's people approached her weeks ago. They threatened her grandson. He's in debt to some unsavory characters. They promised to clear the debt if she provided access to my personal safe. Oliver closed his eyes briefly. So they know everything. Not everything, Eleanor countered, but enough to be dangerous. You need to be extremely careful now. Come to the hotel immediately. Mr. Harrington is here, and we've arranged for additional security. 20 minutes later, Oliver was ushered into Eleanor's hotel suite, where she and Mr. Harrington were deep in conversation with two men who were clearly security professionals, former military or law enforcement, judging by their bearing. The situation has escalated, Mr. Harrington informed him without preamble. Jeffrey knows about Frederick's journal and its contents. He's likely aware that it documents criminal activities that could send him to prison for decades. That makes him desperate. And dangerous, Eleanor added. I've known Jeffrey since he was a child. He presents himself as sophisticated, controlled, but underneath that veneer is his grandfather's ruthlessness. He won't limit himself to legal and financial threats now. One of the security men, introduced simply as Winters, outlined their immediate plan. We're moving Mrs. Blackwood to a secure location tonight. We recommend you come with us, Mr. Merritt. We can protect you both more effectively if you're together. What about Mia? Oliver asked immediately. If Jeffrey knows she helped me, we've already dispatched a team to her apartment, Winters assured him. They'll bring her to the same location. But Oliver's phone rang before he could respond. Mia's number. He answered immediately. Hello, Mr. Merritt. Victor Crane's smooth voice sent ice through Oliver's veins. I believe we need to revisit our earlier conversation. this time with more meaningful incentives. If you've hurt her, Oliver began, his voice shaking with rage. Dr. Chen is perfectly fine, Crane interrupted. For now. Whether she remains that way depends entirely on your cooperation. Eleanor was already on her phone, likely alerting Winter's team that they were too late. The security professionals moved with practiced efficiency, one speaking quietly into a radio, while the other began rapidly typing on a laptop. What do you want? Oliver demanded. The journal, of course, and your written notarized statement renouncing any claim to Blackwood assets or heritage. Crane's voice remained calm, almost bored. In exchange, Dr. Chen returns unharmed, and you both receive passage to anywhere in the world, along with the 5 million originally offered. Generous, considering the circumstances. I need proof that Mia is all right, Oliver insisted. There was a pause, then Mia's voice came on the line, strained but steady. Ollie, I'm okay, don't worry about me. Don't give them what they... Her voice cut off abruptly. You have 1 hour, Crane said when he returned to the call. I'll text instructions to this number. Come alone, or Dr. Chen will suffer the consequences. The call ended. Oliver looked up to find Eleanor, Harrington, and the security team watching him with grave expressions. We can track her phone, Winters said immediately, and we have options for extraction once we locate her. Too risky, Eleanor countered. Jeffrey wouldn't leave such an obvious trail. They'll have disposed of her phone already. Mr. Harrington cleared his throat. There's another option. We give them what they want, or appear to. The journal is our only leverage, Oliver protested. Not the original, Harrington clarified. We create a convincing replica, similar binding, aged paper, comparable handwriting, empty pages where crucial information should be. Winters nodded slowly. Possible, but challenging to execute convincingly in under an hour. I have resources, Eleanor stated, connections to people who specialize in document reproduction, art forgery essentially, though they prefer the term historical replication. Within 20 minutes, Eleanor's connections had been mobilized. A master document forger was already working on creating a convincing replica of Frederick's journal, using photographs Oliver had taken of its exterior and general layout. The replica wouldn't withstand close scrutiny, but it might buy them time in the exchange. As they waited for the forged journal to be delivered, Oliver paced the hotel suite, his mind racing through scenarios, each more horrifying than the last. This is my fault, he said bitterly. I should never have involved Mia. Jeffrey is the one who crossed this line, Eleanor said firmly, not you. Oliver's phone chimed with a text message, instructions for the exchange, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. 1 hour, come alone, with the journal and signed documents. No police, no security. Classic ambush scenario, Winters assessed, looking over Oliver's shoulder at the message. We can't send you in there alone. We won't, Harrington agreed. But we need a plan that doesn't put Dr. Chen at greater risk. For the next 30 minutes, they strategized. The forged journal arrived, an impressive facsimile given the time constraints. The notarized documents renouncing any claim to the Blackwood fortune were genuine. They could be invalidated later if necessary. Winters and his team prepared surveillance equipment and weapons, communicating with additional personnel who would position themselves around the warehouse. Remember, Winters instructed Oliver as they prepared to leave, your only job is to keep them talking. Buy time for us to locate Dr. Chen and neutralize any threats. Don't be a hero. Oliver nodded grimly, the weight of the fake journal heavy in his hands. As they were about to depart, Eleanor approached him, pressing something into his palm, a small object wrapped in cloth. Thomas's watch, she said quietly. I believe it should be with you tonight. Oliver unwrapped it briefly, the gold gleaming in the light. Thank you, he said, genuinely touched by the gesture. He slipped it into his pocket, an unexpected talisman connecting him to the grandfather he had never known. The warehouse loomed dark and imposing against the night sky, its abandoned loading bays and broken windows creating perfect vantage points for observers or snipers. Oliver approached alone as instructed, the journal tucked under his arm, his body tense with fear and determination. Winters and his team were watching from concealed positions, utilizing thermal imaging and other surveillance technology to map the building's occupants. Through his earpiece, Oliver could hear Winters' calm voice. 4 heat signatures inside, 2 stationary near the center, likely Crane and Dr. Chen, 2 others moving. Guards, proceed with caution. The massive main door of the warehouse was partially open. Oliver slipped through the gap, stepping into a cavernous space dimly lit by industrial fixtures hanging from the high ceiling. Dust motes danced in the weak light, and the smell of rust and abandonment filled the air. "That's far enough, Mr. Merritt." Victor Crane's voice echoed through the space. He stepped forward from the shadows, impeccably dressed as always, looking utterly out of place in the decrepit warehouse. "Do you have what we asked for?" "Where's Mia?" Oliver demanded, standing his ground. Crane gestured and a second figure emerged from the darkness. Jeffrey Blackwood, holding Mia firmly by the arm. She appeared unharmed but frightened, her eyes locking with Oliver's across the distance. "The journal and the documents," Jeffrey said coldly. "Then you get your girlfriend back." "Let me see that she's unharmed first," Oliver insisted. Jeffrey pushed Mia forward roughly. She stumbled, but kept her balance, walking toward Oliver with forced composure. When she reached him, he squeezed her hand briefly, a silent promise that everything would be all right. "Now the journal," Jeffrey demanded, extending his hand. Oliver hesitated, then slowly held out the forged journal. Jeffrey snatched it eagerly, flipping through the pages with growing intensity. After a moment, his face contorted with rage. "This is a fake!" he snarled, hurling the journal to the floor. "Where is the real journal?" In his earpiece, Winter's voice was tense. "We've got movement, multiple new heat signatures entering from the rear. This isn't right." Before Oliver could process this information, the warehouse erupted into chaos. The doors burst open, and armed men in tactical gear rushed in, not Winter's team, but a different group altogether. Jeffrey looked as shocked as Oliver felt. "FBI! Everybody down, hands where we can see them!" Jeffrey's security personnel reached for their weapons, but froze when they saw they were outnumbered. Crane raised his hands slowly, his composure finally cracking. "Jeffrey Blackwood," a female agent announced, approaching with her weapon trained on him. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, racketeering, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping." And as the agent secured the scene, Oliver pulled Mia close, shielding her from the chaos. "Are you okay?" he asked urgently. She nodded, still shaken but resilient. "I'm fine, but what's happening? Who are these people?" Oliver was equally confused until he spotted a familiar figure enter the warehouse behind the FBI agents, Mr. Harrington, accompanied by a distinguished-looking man in a tailored suit. "Oliver," Harrington called, making his way over. "Allow me to introduce Special Agent Robert Donovan. He's been investigating the Blackwood shipping operations for the past 3 years." The agent shook Oliver's hand firmly. "We've been building a case against Jeffrey Blackwood for a long time, but we've lacked concrete evidence connecting him directly to the criminal enterprises. Until now, the journal," Oliver realized. "But how?" "It's in the safe deposit box." Harrington smiled thinly. "Not exactly. The original journal is currently in FBI custody, has been since early this morning. What Mrs. Blackwood had you return to the bank was a copy." "You used me as bait," Oliver said, understanding dawning. "This whole setup, you knew Jeffrey would make a move if he thought I had evidence against him." "A calculated risk," Harrington admitted, "but we had you under surveillance the entire time. We would never have allowed real harm to come to you or Dr. Chen." Across the warehouse, Jeffrey was being led away in handcuffs, his face a mask of cold fury. As he passed Oliver, he stopped briefly. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice low and venomous. "The Blackwood legacy is more than you can possibly understand. This isn't over." As Jeffrey was escorted out, Eleanor entered the warehouse, supported by Winters. She looked exhausted but satisfied as she approached Oliver. "I'm sorry for the deception," she said quietly. But it was necessary. Jeffrey had to be stopped, and conventional methods weren't working. You planned this from the beginning, Oliver realized. Finding me, showing me the painting, revealing my possible connection to Thomas. It was all to draw Jeffrey out. Eleanor shook her head. Not entirely. I truly believe you are Thomas's grandson. The resemblance is undeniable, and the timing fits perfectly. But yes, I also saw an opportunity to finally bring Jeffrey to justice for corrupting Frederick's legacy. She reached out to touch his arm. You deserved to know the truth about your heritage, Oliver. That part was never a deception. As the FBI completed their operation, Oliver, Mia, Eleanor, and Mr. Harrington were escorted to a secure location for debriefing. The night stretched into morning as statements were taken and explanations given. Jeffrey's arrest would trigger investigations into multiple Blackwood enterprises, potentially unraveling decades of criminal activity. What happens now? Oliver asked Eleanor as they sat in a quiet corner of the FBI field office, cups of mediocre coffee growing cold in their hands. That depends on you, she replied. The legal battle for your rightful place in the Blackwood family can proceed if that's what you want. With Jeffrey facing federal charges, there would be less opposition. Oliver considered this, turning Thomas's pocket watch over in his hands. The inheritance, the fortune, the Blackwood name, all of it could be his. But at what cost? And was that really what he wanted? I need time, he said finally, to process everything that's happened, to decide who Oliver Merritt really is. Eleanor nodded understandingly. Take all the time you need. The truth about your heritage isn't going anywhere. She smiled faintly. Thomas would be proud of you, I think. You have his determination. 3 months later, Oliver stood on the rocky shore of a small coastal town in Argentina, waves crashing against a weathered lighthouse in the distance. After weeks of research and travel, he had finally found it. The beach from the painting, the place where Thomas Blackwood had stood as a boy after being torn from his original life. Mia stood beside him, her hand warm in his as they gazed out at the Atlantic. After the trauma of their experience with Jeffrey, they had grown closer than ever, united by their shared ordeal and by the journey they were now undertaking together. Do you think we'll find answers here? She asked, her voice nearly lost in the wind and waves. I don't know, Oliver admitted, but it feels right to be here, to see what he saw. Through painstaking investigation, and with Eleanor's help, they had traced Thomas Blackwood's life in Argentina, his adoption by Michael Donovan, a trusted associate of Jonathan Blackwood, his marriage to Maria Vega in 1957, the birth of his son James in 1958. Most of the trail had gone cold after that, until the car accident in 1990 that had orphaned baby Oliver and led to his adoption by the Merritts. DNA testing had finally confirmed what the remarkable resemblance had suggested. Oliver was indeed Thomas Blackwood's grandson, the heir to a complicated legacy of wealth, power, and secrets. Jeffrey Blackwood was facing multiple federal charges, his empire crumbling as investigators untangled decades of criminal activity. The legitimate Blackwood businesses would survive, but under new leadership and with greater transparency. As for Oliver's claim to the Blackwood fortune, that remained in legal limbo, partly by his own choice. He had requested time to consider his place in the family, to decide whether he wanted to embrace the Blackwood name and all it entailed. For now, it was enough to stand on this beach, feeling the same wind that had tousled Thomas's hair all those years ago, watching the same waves crash against the same weathered rocks. To connect with the grandfather he had never known, but whose blood ran in his veins. To understand the journey that had led to his own existence. Whatever you decide, Mia said, sensing his thoughts. Whether you become Oliver Blackwood or remain Oliver Merritt, I'm with you. He squeezed her hand gratefully, his other hand closing around the pocket watch in his jacket. The inscription caught the fading sunlight as he opened it one more time. To Thomas. May your time be filled with joy. Love, Mother. Oliver closed the watch and looked out at the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. His past and future stretched before him like the endless ocean, full of both shadows and light, mysteries and possibilities. For now, standing on this beach with Mia beside him and the watch that had finally found its way home, that was enough. The end.